Welcome to the first Public Policy Economic Empowerment Conference lecture. So we appreciate you all being here. But we do want to let you know that there are some very special people. All of you are very special. But there are some very special people in the audience. And we want to make sure that we acknowledge as many people as possible. And we're going to have a word eventually from the gentleman in the hat who's the owner of Yasa's. Yeah. So if you like the food. And so what this is, as you might know, this is actually an opportunity. This is actually an opportunity for you to hear ideas that you wouldn't hear anywhere else. You're not going to hear these ideas at the University of Chicago. You're not going to hear these ideas at the Economic Club of Chicago. These are ideas that are important to our community that you're going to hear from our speakers. But in-house, we've got some people who you must know. And I'm going to go around, and it will not be fair because everybody here is so important. First, I'd like to introduce Eugene Delanato from the International Black Pages. Mr. Delanato, Black Pages International. Mr. Bernard Clay, Introspection, College and Youth Services. Mr. Harold Davis, Amer-I-Can, also contractor for the Chicago Public Schools. Mr. Manuel Garcia, Manuel, and he brought a team out with him, so thank you for coming out. Helen Hammond Redding from the Christopher Redding Youth Asthma Foundation. Thank you, Helen. Big supporter of Black Star. Dr. Kirk Harris from the Family Health Center. Dr. Harris. A big friend of Black Star, and she does some of our consulting work, formerly with the Field Foundation of Illinois, Cheryl Heads. Cheryl? If you listen to WVON almost any time now, everyone's talking about reparations. A person who has been working on reparations for the past 30 years and leading the charge across the country, Cam Harris, Chairman in Cobra. Good friend of the Black Star Project, has worked everywhere on the South Side, West Side, youth employment, etc. Saquon Lawrence. Saquon. A guy who's always pushing forward not-for-profits in the community, pushing forward the opportunity for not-for-profits to do well, to make money, to establish themselves. He's got stuff almost every week. The Monroe Foundation, Otis Monroe. Some of you might know that the Black Star Project ran and still runs a Saturday university. It is something that we've been doing for about 5 years now, and we've got a couple of teachers with us from our Saturday university. Etta Martin, And Linda Puckett.
Thanks, Bill.
She's our lead teacher at the KLSU, Kimberly Lightford Saturday University.
Thank you.
Thank you. Another person who's just all over the place and has done, so, excuse me. Sorry. But does so much in the community in so many ways. Her own organization is Africa Enterprise, Africa Porter. And we have friends from the University of Illinois here. A person. We have people from the University of Illinois. A person who we knew or met a long time ago. She called me up and she said, "You used to teach my children Tai Chi and Kung Fu." And I said, "Oh, you must be 75. But she's not. No. Then I must be 75. But anyway, Ms. Joy Valentine, University of Illinois. And her students, she brought out some students with her. And then finally, from Empowerment Resources, Eric Williams. Eric? And we have others. I mean, you see, I see Yvette Moyo here, who actually, she has a newspaper that I encourage. She has a newspaper that I encourage you all to get. And she also manages the Quarry on 75th, 2400 East 75th Street. I was there on Sunday for an event. Beautiful venue. So we thank you. And then, and I see from Urban Juncture, Bernard Lloyd, 51st Street. In fact, he does the wonderful, what do you call them, the Boxville. And he uses shipping containers to run entrepreneur stands out of, and especially during the summer. Pop up, absolutely, absolutely. And there are more, and I'm sorry for anyone that I might have missed. But the last person I'd like to introduce before we go into our program is the clerk of the Circuit Court of Cook County, Miss Dorothy Brown. And as a point of privilege, I'd just like for Miss Brown just to say a word.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon to everyone, and I am really elated to be here. I wanted to just get an opportunity to come and show my support for Mr. Philip Jackson, who is always an advocate for what is right and what is good for our children, for our community. And so to talk about the African American community economics being under siege, it's a timely topic. It's important that we do everything that we can to help one another, to help lift the community as a whole. And so, Phil, thank you for doing this. We're really on I would say a real point in which change must come in our community in order for us to continue to go forward, in order for our children to be successful. So, Phil, congratulations to you. For someone that is always out in the forefront, never gives up, you know, it's sometimes you have to be internally motivated and encouraged, and Phil is a perfect example of that. So I'm happy to see all of you here in support of Mr. Jackson's efforts. God bless you all.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you. And then lastly, if you like the meal, well, I love it, but if you like it, Here's the owner of Yassa's Restaurant, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I really appreciate all of you. And at this time where everybody understands about the end of Black Story Month, I will just take this occasion to say thank you to all of you and to Mr. Jackson for really continuing sponsoring Yassa Restaurant. We really appreciate you. And at the end of the day, we all try to do the right thing. And economic development is something so important, and all of us need to get involved and to build some bridges so we can network and try to support one another. I really appreciate this because every time he has an occasion, he sponsors my restaurant, which I'm proud to come and be part of you to let you know that Senegal and Yassa is the closest part from Africa here to Bronzeville. and that Saturday over there, just tell something about it. I thank you again. I say bon appétit et merci beaucoup.
Where's Yassa?
Oh, Yassa is right here. You know Yassa.
And can you bring us some menus and we'll pass
Right
them?
here.
Oh!
Right here.
Philip Jackson, thank you for those words. Thank you for welcoming everyone. Thank you for putting this together and all the hard work that went into it for yourself, Ms. Gloria Smith, Shanita Howard, all of you guys did an excellent job of pulling this event together. And we thank each and every one of you, whether you were individually mentioned or not, we thank each and every one of you for coming out. It's absolutely necessary. It is an absolute privilege to be in such a room with so many great people that are doing, have done, and continue to do so many great things in the city of Chicago and around our country as well. I think it's very, very important that we continue to have these discussions and build these bridges so we can do these types of works together. It's critically important that the individual works that we do take place, but it's more important that we do them together so that we can actually have a real chance at combating some of the obstacles that we face in our community, because some of those systems are very organized to bring about some destruction in our communities, and if we're going to save them, we have to do it together, whether you're in the education, finances, whatever your specific area of expertise or interest is. Let's do all of those things together. So we thank each and every one of you for everything that you bring. It is our pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. Thank you all. With that being said, I want to bring up our speaker for this afternoon. It's a very dynamic individual, a list of accomplishments far too long to name, so I will simply tell you that he is a great historian, a researcher, and one of the best economic strategists that our country has to offer. Please help me welcome Mr. George S. Wright.
Thank you. So we're going to get right to this, and you know, the thing about public speaking is that when you pass things out, people start focusing on what you passed out, so you say irrelevant things. But I am going to try to say something relevant while she's passing that out, which is I am certainly honored. Should I be using this mic, or can you not hear me, or are you okay? Okay. See, that was kind of irrelevant because what I'm about to say, I don't know if you're going to be able to put this on TV. We'll see. But I would like to thank Phil and the Black Star. I think one really resounding round of applause for Phil and the work that he's been doing as pioneering. I'm also so fortunate to be the first speaker in this series and to speak during Black History Month, which for me is a little bit oxymoronish, because I think that the contributions that Black people make to this country should not be resigned and confined to one single month, which happens to be the shortest month of the year. I think we should be celebrating our accomplishments for 13 months out of the year, if that's possible. So let me get right into the siege if most people have this. So I have been researching this topic for about 5 years. And I will give you the list of my reading materials because I think that they are compelling. Some of them very old, some of them very contemporary. But let me say this. The siege is really, really a brilliant strategy. I learned about the siege by doing my research, and I started to read about a subject that I don't think a lot of us really read about, which was the Civil War. And historians will tell you that had it not been for the siege strategy, the war would have been lost for the North. Think of our country being ruled by Southerners with Jim Crow and all of the other aspects that came with Southern life. But it was a siege strategy that Ulysses S. Grant employed with a guy named General Sherman, who they said was the author and king of siege warfare. So the siege warfare goes like this. If I can't take the fort, what I will do is starve you out. So you call in your engineers and you cut off the water supplies. The next thing you do is you cut off all the supplies coming in, food, medicine, letters, everything, and you sit and wait. In Vicksburg, they say that the siege took 90 days. You'll see that on the first page. And by the end, the Confederate soldiers and their families were eating horses, dogs, cats, rats. It was a normal part of their diet. Sooner or later, you will react to the siege very predictably. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But you have to have patience. Flip to the next page. This is going to not take me long to go through this. You know, sometimes people have presentations and they say they're going to take 15 minutes and they have 50 slides. And you're thinking, how can you possibly go through 50 slides in 15 minutes? I think there's 5 or 6 here. Traditional items, as I talked about, are food, water, supplies, books, and letters. That's the traditional warfare siege strategy. What are economic siege items? Well, I've listed them here. Education. Give them subpar education. Healthy food and water. Take that away. Careers versus job. Give them some summer jobs, but don't train them to have careers. And let's take away some medicine and then quality health. We make jokes about it. You don't go to the county where you think the county is designed for you to go. Okay, let's start the economic siege. First of all, you got to select your fort or your neighborhood. Then you select your goals. Then you develop the economic siege strategy, and you understand that timeline where patience is really a virtue here. In the warfare siege, you see they would wait so long that as people were getting starved out, they started to run out of the fort. So the Confederate soldiers said, well, we got something for you. While you're running out at night, we're going to shoot you in the back. Because you're deserting us. You're leaving the fort. Now, you got to understand something. I'm going to talk about this in just a second. While you're being sieged, you also must be shelled. See, in warfare, if you're hungry and you're dehydrated, which most of you all are not hungry, what will happen is that at night, you shell them. You don't necessarily try to knock the walls down. You're just sending cannonballs over the wall because if you hit something great, but what we want to do is we want to keep you up at night, distract you from what's really happening because that's the brilliance of the siege. I picked 2 forts. If you turn to the next page, I picked Inglewood and the Bucket of Blood. Why did you pick these? Well, I'm from Inglewood, born and raised, 60th and Princeton. And last time I checked, Phil grew up in the Bucket of Blood, or he lives there now. Now, the Bucket of Blood is not a neighborhood per se, but those of us who know about the Bucket of Blood, we know why it's called the Bucket of Blood. So let's go from the bottom up on this page. The first thing you got to do is this: why do you pick this neighborhood? Well, it's prime real estate, Bernard. See, location, location, location. The next thing is the patience of the siege is working now, as we speak, because people are exiting the fort. Keep a few tokens. I know some of you all gonna get a little touchy with this one. Keep a few tokens in place so the real intent is hidden. because they feel if you weren't so lazy, you could bring yourself up from your bootstraps. Not understanding that the siege is taking away all the boots and the straps. Then you insert a few non-minority pioneers. Every time I go to Lake Meadows, I see some young white girl walking her dog. See, they pioneers. They're the advanced troops of the siege. Turn to the next page. I'm about to get out of time here. So while the siege is withholding all resources, there's one resource that is the foundation of the siege. Doc, this is deep. What happens here is that if you turn the page, Phil has a t-shirt. The first time I met him, he gave this. He said, educate or die. I need a t-shirt that says educate or be sieged. Because the most important thing about taking away your resources is education. Now let me go to quickly, because I think my time is I'm doing good. The difference here is that in economic siege warfare versus warfare, the fort is already created for you. It's there. Vicksburg was there, right? We didn't have to create the fort to then siege it. In America, the siege has been happening for decades, and we've created forts. You see, the siege goes back to the medieval times, perfected during the times of the Civil War. The difference, once again, being is that we have to create the neighborhood or the fort, Inglewood, right? North Lawndale, Bucket of Blood, Austin, for us to then be able to siege it. This has been happening for a very long time, as we have systematic policies that have segregated our housing in such a way that you are going to be corralled into an area that makes it very easy for us to siege. See, I can't siege you when you're all over the place. I got to have you together. And then if I throw some distractions your way, like the Contras, when they introduced drugs into California with the Bloods and the Crips, right? Somebody here knows what I'm talking about. That created a drug warfare that was the shelling part. See, we got to keep you distracted with drugs while we siege your neighborhoods. So let me read something to you. A couple things that are important about education. The first one is how we create the fort. With segregated housing projects, African Americans became more removed from mainstream society than ever during the Truman years. This is not yesterday. Packed into ghettos where community life was impossible, where access to jobs and social services was more difficult, and where supervision of adolescents, even a semblance of community policing, was highly impractical. In 1976, the Supreme Court adopted lower court findings that Chicago Housing Authority, some of you all know about the low end, the Jecks we used to call them. You from the Jecks? Yeah, Robert Taylor. With the complicity of Federal Housing Agency, had unconstitutionally selected sites to maintain the city's segregated landscape. This is where the projects came from. Although the authority had suggested tracts that would integrate white neighborhoods, each project was subjected to the veto by the who? The alderman, in whose ward it was proposed. See, in the ruling, district judge who originally heard the case wrote, no criteria other than race can plausibly explain the veto over 99.5% of the housing units located on white sites based on the CHA's expert judgment, and at the same time rejected only 10% sites for black people or black sites. This is the systematic congregating of people, so we create a fort so that now it's easy for us to siege you. Now let's talk about education siege. As had previously attempted with higher education, the states then dangled a series of school equalization packages before the NAACP and the black community as a bribe to drop the lawsuits and accept separate schools as a reality in America. President Dwight Eisenhower, once again, this has been going on for a long time, sympathized with the white South. At the behest of his great friend, South Carolina Governor James Burns, Eisenhower hosted a small dinner party at the White House to explain to Chief Justice Earl Warren that Southerners are not bad people. There's some good people on the other side of that. Some of you all know what I'm talking about. I see the light bulbs getting to be about 90 watts. We're going to make them 110. All they are concerned about is to see their sweet, this is a quote, their sweet little girls are not required to sit in school alongside big, overgrown Negroes. At the same time, Eisenhower warned Governor Burns the last-minute Southern attempt to put some money into Negro schools would be prohibitively expensive. During World War II, the federal government estimated that it would take, in 2014 dollars, $1.2 trillion to equalize the schools. You don't have $1.2 million, so it's better to siege them. That's the strategy. In 1959, while white children were being educated, 2,700 black children were locked out. Somebody here knows where I'm talking about. Some people don't. The defiance of Prince Edward County was singular. No other school system in the nation remained closed for 5 years. This is a black school system that remained closed for 5 years from 1959 to 1964, rather than comply with Brown versus Board of Education, December 9, 1952. The impoverished but determined African-American community managed to send some children away to relatives, but only 35 students were able to attend those out-of-state schools on a full-time basis. During those 5 long years, critical in terms of a child's development, most African-American students spent their formative education time in activity centers that the black community cobbled together named Saturday University. No, that's not here, but that's what I'm talking about. See, the Baltimore African-American reported that these makeshift centers, some in basements, churches, others in abandoned shacks staffed overwhelmingly by housewives and those with only a high school diploma, could not possibly provide anything approximating an adequate education. These resources were simply not available to open more than 3 days a week and have a curriculum of little more than scant programs of reading, singing, and discussion. These years have taken a great toll on our children. We've never caught up. See, this is called the 5-year siege. Remember, you gotta have patience. Last one I'll read to you is, this one's tripped out because it talks about the best time to siege him. Despite his profession of and supposed obsession with a colorblind society where he said nothing is done to or for anyone because of race. Somebody said that. I think his name was President Ronald Reagan. His budget proposals targeted very specifically those programs in which blacks were overrepresented, even as they protected the other portion of society's the societal safety net, such as Social Security, where African Americans were but a small fraction of the recipients. For example, almost 5 times as many black college-bound high school seniors as whites came from families with incomes of more than $12,000. The Reagan administration reconfigured various grants and loan packages so that the needier the student, the harder it was for he or she, and these Reagan cuts were particularly hard on us. Not surprisingly, because if you do the siege right, you can't be surprised. It's predictive. Not surprisingly, nationwide black enrollment in college plummeted during the Reagan years from 34% to 26%. This just at the moment when post-industrial economy made an undergraduate degree more important than ever. 15,000 fewer African Americans were in college during the 80s than in the 70s. Exactly, who knew, right? This is siege warfare. Now, people have often asked, well, where did you do your reading? Let me give you, and if you got a pen, write some of this down. There's a book out there called The Color of Law. It lays out specifically. Somebody who's read this book, raise your hand. This lays out specifically how these policies in housing have segregated us to a point where we are now primed and ready to be sieged, and the siege is happening. There's another one called White Rage. This book is very deep. I mean, it talks about the whole issue of the siege. It doesn't call it the siege, it just calls it racism. And there's a small book, it's only about 100 pages long. This book is very old, it's called None Dare Call It Conspiracy. It's a really interesting book. It was so interesting, they took it off the market and then brought it back on because it talks about the Warburgs, the Rockefellers, the ships, the economic history of our company and our country, and how the Federal Reserve Bank comes from a communist manifesto. This republic was never geared to have a central bank, but it's controlling the money centers of this country while we siege the rest of you all.
Will you repeat that title, please?
None dare call it conspiracy. Some of you all may have heard this quote. I'm going to read the quote, and if you don't know who it is, maybe you should try to find out. If you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and pull it out 6 inches, there's no progress. If you pull it out all the way, still, that's not progress. Progress is in healing the wound the blow made. They have not pulled the knife out as much as healed the wound. They won't even admit the knife is there. Now, people ask me all the time, they say, well, George, what are the solutions to the siege? I don't know. My research hasn't taken me that far. But I do know this. I'm going to play something that takes about 1.5 minutes. It's one of the most powerful 1.5 minutes, if I can find it, that I've ever heard. It is, let's see if I can find it for you. It's a speech that basically, as soon as you hear his voice, you will recognize it, but the problem is that people don't hear this speech because it was given in such a small church in Selma, Alabama, that nobody's heard of it. But I'm going to give it to you if I can tee this up right now.
As he would be at 80, and the cessation of breathing in his life is merely the belated announcement of an earlier death of the spirit. He died. A man dies when he refuses to stand up for that which is right. A man dies when he refuses to stand up for justice. A man dies when he refuses to take a stand for that which is true. So we're going to stand up right here amid horses. We're going to stand up right here in Alabama amid the billy clubs. We're going to stand up right here in Alabama amid police dogs if they have them. We're going to stand up amid tear gas. We're going to stand up amid anything that they can muster up, letting the world know that we are determined to be free.
So people have asked me, how do you combat the siege? You can't combat the siege when you've died. So we have a lot of people in our community who've died. They've run out of these communities and they're selling their properties at pennies on a dollar. That was the plan. They're being shelled by hopelessness and drugs. That was the plan. They're being bombarded with poor education, Flaming Hots and Cheetos becomes their diet. That was the plan. See, we have adopted, when you adopt the siege strategy and you don't know it's upon you, you adopt the strategy that every man is for himself and God for us all. Instead of what this man just said, you've got to stand up for what is right, for what is true and what is just. And when you don't do that, you're already dead. And the cessation of breathing is the belated announcement. You died. Thank you. Question? Thank you. So I'll have to figure out if we have time for questions, but I don't know if we do.
We will.
Okay. Okay, so questions? The siege will leave you speechless.
Right. I don't know if you read the article, $1 Million Block. And what it basically said was, it took 5 zip codes, North Lawndale, Austin, Inglewood, Roseland, and West Humboldt Park. And between 2007 and 2011, they gave felony convictions to 75% of the men between 18 and 54. There was 1,104 blocks that they spent over $1 million in locking up these black men. And then it was on one block on Cicero and Adams, they spent $2.5 million. And so, is it safe to say that that was the beginning of the siege, and those 5 zip codes were all the murders and shootings that are happening right now?
No, it's safe to say that that was the result of the siege. Because when you isolate a community, and you do things, which is, again, this is the shelling part of it, when it's easier for a black woman to go in and get a job that a black man should have, and I'm all for equality in terms of jobs. What you're doing is you're setting up this self-perpetuating, the beast is eating itself. Because we know that for a fact that some data points are out there to say that in the community that you mentioned, it's 90% and above in terms of fatherless homes. So when we talk about fathers, families, and healthy communities, right, it starts with the notion that if you do the siege right, the black man will be the first to leave, right? So let me give you a quick example. I was a banker very early in my career, and I was, working with a customer, and she was a school teacher, and she was applying for a loan, and she said to me, I only want you to put down a certain amount of my income just to make sure I can qualify, her and her husband. And I'm like, well, why would you do that? Why not put all your income down? She says, because I don't want my husband he's a good man, he's a blue collar worker, and I don't want him to feel embarrassed when he looks at this paper and sees that I put down more income than him. So that mentality to me means she had something else on her mind other than the loan. It was her family, right? And unless we have a family unit behind the fort, see, the real solution, in my opinion, is to, when you know they're going to dam the water up and cut it off, you got to build your own wells. Well, that takes cooperation, communication, and togetherness. Something that we don't seem to be too good at. I don't know if I answered the question.
Where can we find that speech that you just played?
So it's one of the, if you Google Martin Luther King speeches, and then you have to find it or look for it, but it's the 7 unknown speeches or something that, and then if you go into that, you'll see like 7 of them, and this is one of them at this really small church.
I read it in the book, Martin Luther King on Leadership. I forget the author of it, but you can get it in any bookstore. So.
I just found it on Google, but that's great information, is that there's a book out there that talks about it.
One of many speeches he had with it.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kurt.
Brother George, thanks for that lovely analogy. But I want to ask you, in the context of that analogy, there's this kind of larger narrative about the role that governmental policy has played. And you mentioned the Color of Law, Rothstein's book, and the numerous public policies that have embedded inherent racial and economic inequality and have built what Rothstein calls the ghetto as a function of that isolation that you talked about. So this is a problem at scale, right? And I'm wondering what your thought is related to kind of the disassembling or of that scaled problem, because it's highly institutionalized, it's historic, and while self-help is an important element of that, when the self-help is buttressed against these huge systemic barriers, it gets mitigated. So I just want to hear your thoughts about that.
I think it's a a very complicated and complex question. Let me see if I can take the question and break it down to its most common denominator. What you're saying is that the systematic racism that has afflicted black people is huge. And while there are certain speeches out there that were given to people about, you know, the famous pound cake speech, right, which talk about, you know, what are we not doing as black people? And I understand that, right, but most of what we're up against is not what we're not doing, it's what we're up against. That's your question. And how do you get to solutions at scale when the attack is at scale? I only have one example, and I don't know if this is right. So while I cried actually, because when you have, you know, children and you send them off to school and you get a call that says your son or your daughter is in a closet and it's some guy in here with a gun, right? I can't imagine the feeling, right? Much less burying my son or my daughter because I put them in a higher education institute. So what we saw in Florida, it was emotional for me because I have children and I've sent them off to school, right? They're adults now, but I've been there. But then I hearken back to one of the most turning points, at least for me, in the civil rights movement was two instances. One was there were two little girls in a church. Can you imagine the bomb was unbelievable. That was enough. But what happened after that was there were some white freedom riders that they caught riding around with some black people. Once that happened, oh, we got to get the National Guard in from Zimbabwe, wherever we can get them from. But black people have been lynched for decades. So unless these opportunities start to affect all of us, because when those children, when those 17 people got murdered, a part of each and every one of us died. You may not know it, but a part of us left here. But so now when we get diversity of attacked, if you will, now we can start working on scale. That's the only answer I have.
Thank you for stating my reframing of your question was better than my original question.
Well, you're a doctor, so we expect that.
Just one more question, please.
I don't know. You pick them. I got 3 or 4.
We'll have time for more questions. I just want to give everybody the opportunity that needs to go about their day to go about their day. If you want us to talk and ask more questions later, we'll be happy to make that available.
I don't know who was first, so you all got it.
I believe that young lady was right there.
The one with the phone?
The one.
So I see the parallel between the answer to this question to the opiates, the use of opiates and what's happening in our community. The siege has been to ignore our deaths and our dysfunction caused by opiates inserted into our community as well as drugs. But at this point, my question is, while we are obviously under siege and the power community has the advantage of patience, and we are always in a critical state of urgency. We are trying to save our lives and other people's lives, not to mention our homes and our communities. Where do we position ourselves within the siege? We know that everybody's not going to make it in the siege. Everybody's not going to make it, but what are the most immediate steps, because it is urgent, that we take right now?
So I would disagree with your premise, and I would work backwards. Okay. I disagree that everybody won't make it. I think everybody can make it if we make it our business that everybody can make it. But I'm not so Pollyannic and so theoretical that I don't understand that there are people who will be running out. I gave you a list of, this is the hierarchy, people are going to be running out. But I think it's important to make sure that I leave you with this, because people think that, as you mentioned, the opioids are another part of the siege. The opioids are the shelling. See, that's the distraction. See, let me get you straight on this. it's what the siege isn't that you should leave here with. First of all, the siege is not new. We talked about that. It's been happening for hundreds of years. Secondly, if it's not new, it must be intentional. It is not by happenstance. It is not drugs that are just kind of flowing into our community because someone, this is by design, because that basically tells you that I can concentrate on this other thing while not understanding that you just took my water away. That if I can't depend upon the educational system to educate my children, then you have to do it yourself. And nobody that's a child should be left behind. And I cannot accept that. And third, and this is the most important thing, so it's not new, it's intentional. It takes time. It takes time for it to come to fruition so that you become so immune to it, you don't even know it's happening to you. It's like cooking the frog that my grandmother used to talk about. Don't put the frog in the boiling water, put him in some nice, cool water. Everything's good. Somebody got a good education. They let them go to Yale. Somebody went to FAMU. Oh, this is so lovely. He got a nice house now. He got his monograms on his shirts. He got a nice watch. He looking so good. While the rest of us, we got hell to pay here. So, if we understand that this is all by design, then we will say to ourselves, no one should be left behind here. And these things that they're doing to us are to distract us from the real goal, which is to get you out of that fort. Remember, the siege was to remove you because we couldn't see in the Civil War, they were too good. The South was good. They had guerrilla fighters back then. They had stuff where they made bombs so as because the North, they were marching up because they were trained by England. I mean, this is kind of interesting reading. So they would march up in the old gentleman, I'm going to shoot you, it's going to be 8 of us, and then you're going to have 8 you, and you're going to shoot, and then I'm going to fall, and then we'll... The South was like, we're from the South. We don't know nothing about all that England stuff where y'all sitting there shooting each other. We're going to shoot you and run. They was black people in the South. That's what we would be doing, right? So they said to themselves, self, we got to come up with a new technique. So they would shoot a few Northerners and run back up in the fort. We spent so much time, the North did, trying to get to these forts, they couldn't get to them. Finally, they got Sherman. Sherman, you know what Sherman's biggest criticism was? This is not a, I don't understand how he could be so ruthless. He don't understand there's women and children behind that fort. He told him, he said, I hope they can eat those bullets they got. This is war. Nobody told them to hide behind that fort. They can come out of there. The whole point is, get you out of Englewood as cheap and as fast as we can. Get you out of North Lawndale as cheap and as fast as we can. And you will leave because you've been sieged.